time loses its power when things can be done really quickly.
So what actually is this disruption we're talking about in the legal industry?
In my fantasy future state, the opposite of the wheels spinning faster and faster, if we tackle busy culture, and then we're like, great, like this technology is so good, everything's done quickly.
So you will need to steer into the crystal ball.
The generational shift is a huge topic.
Today's episode is sponsored by VXT, the phone system built for law firms. VXT integrates with practice management systems so that when lawyers make calls, their billable time and legal advice can be saved in the right place automatically. 20% of billable time goes unrecorded. A lot of that is phone calls that get forgotten about. Get some of those billables back using VXT. Go to vxt.co.nz or click the link in the description to find out more.
So welcome to another episode of the File Notes podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined by Mollie Tregillis to talk about the disruption that's happening in the legal industry and hear her perspective on the underlying cultural and structural changes that might have to take place. So to kick things off, Mollie, I'd love for our listeners to get to know a little bit more about your journey, how you got to where you are now. You've had an impressive career at Minter Ellison before going out on your own. So can you share how you got into the legal industry in the first place?
Sure. I'll try and do the short version because it's been a very windy path, but I did different uni. Did a media and communications degree, which I finished, and I had no idea what job I was meant to have. So that was a bit of a problem, right? So I ended up just applying for a whole lot of postgrad law degrees and got into one. So I thought, oh, well, I'll do it. And I really enjoyed it, to my surprise. I really liked the study. And then, as happens to so many people, I was on the train of clerkships and suddenly I was a graduate at a law firm. And I started my career at Norton Rose, as it then was in Melbourne. I spent 4 years there as a lawyer, as an intellectual property litigator. And I discovered quite quickly that it was not my thing. I've sort of earned my stripes. I did my 4 years, but I just realized that that kind of black letter litigation law in particular was not I just wasn't suited to it. I wasn't good at it. I didn't enjoy it. So I was looking for ways to do things in and around the law. So I ended up doing a whole lot of roles. I sort of learned that I was good at project management. So I went into the legal project management space, which was a fabulous discovery at the time because it sort of blended. I loved the people elements. I loved working with people. I loved getting things organized, tidying up sort of messy matters or projects, and it married all that together without me having to actually do the bit I found incredibly stressful, which was providing advice or drafting pleadings or whatever. And I just my stress was at an all-time high when I was a junior lawyer because I just felt like I could not get it right. And then I slowly got into legal operations. So I went to Herbert Smith Freehills here in Australia, and while I was there, legal operations came to Australia, and we worked out that our roles, what we were doing, was actually legal operations. So it was really exciting time because we'd kind of discovered this career path and this way of working, which was that we all loved. There was a group of us that just loved it, and it now had a name and a kind of trajectory, which was really exciting. And so I was there having a great time, and I got a call from Minter Ellison to basically say, do you want to come and lead legal operations for our litigation department? And I went. I was really blown away by the vision of Gary Adler, the chief digital officer, who's still a chief digital officer. And he just had this big vision of what it would mean to be a leader in legal ops and how legal ops and digital and the lawyers would all work together. And I just kind of got swept up in his vision, which he's executed. Like, it was a vision that we've seen come to reality. Then I had a baby, and I came back to Minter's after having a baby, and I sort of was ready for something, a new challenge. So I thought at the time. And so what that was, setting up the consulting practice in legal operations, supporting in-house legal teams, which I did for the 3 years before I left to come and work for myself. So yeah, it's a winding path, but here we are.
I love it. And so what were kind of the motivating factors after that made you think, I'm going to go try something on my own, where you are now?
Yeah, look, excuse me. It was a long process to get to the point to feel ready to go out on my own. I think I got pretty burnt out when I had a child. I had a baby in the height of the pandemic. Like there was a lot going on. My job was really big. I was traveling every week. I was sort of like in that executive pre-partner phase of life, and everything was going really well, but I just couldn't. I got to the point where I couldn't keep my stress under control. Like and I didn't even realize how stressed I was, to be honest, until I stopped. So I sort of knew that something had to shift. And then I started to realize that a job like that, which was such an amazing job, but it required all of me. Like it was I had one focus, and the focus was building that practice. I had to live and breathe it. And I worked out that actually when I'm thriving and feeling best, I'm doing a whole range of things. Like I might be doing some writing, doing things like this, having clients that I coach, doing some big corporate work, but that's not my only thing. So I had that realization, but I didn't know what it meant. I was like, well, that's a great realization, but that doesn't seem like a possible way to live. And slowly but surely, I sort of put the puzzle pieces together about how that might work for me and for my family financially, and how I could kind of take this risk. And we got ready, my husband and I got ready for it, kind of got the safety net ready. And I left Mintrellison at the end of last year. So I'm sort of 8 or 9 months in, and best decision I've ever made. It's been wonderful. But yeah, it was very scary to make the call and leave a flourishing career at a firm that I loved and still love. Like it was not a small thing to do.
Yeah, it's always hard making a decision when there's something that you love, and why am I leaving it when I love it, but the other thing might not be as good.
And I had no idea what the other thing was. Yeah, it was like safety, something I love, something I was good at, people I loved, versus like, I don't know, this other thing could be good, but I have no idea what it is. So yeah, you're totally right. It was, but I just had an instinct that I needed to do it, and I'm glad I listened to that little quiet instinct that I had.
Yeah. And in terms of the work, is the work you're doing similar, or is it quite different?
It's quite different. So in fact, I have done none of the work I did at Minters. Now, what I'm doing at the moment, it's sort of broken up into 2 main categories. One is really this work around helping organizations with navigate disruption. And of course, the one that's going to come up the most is around emerging technology, or how do businesses get ready for a fundamentally different way of working in terms of their people, the business model, the culture, all those things. So that's often in the form of not so much consulting, like I'm not giving big reports, but I'm facilitating hard conversations. So I'm designing workshops or interventions for, senior execs and people to sit down and discuss the hard things. And that's the work I really love. I also do quite a bit of innovation work in the corporate world, where I've done innovation diagnostic for an innovation function. And then I do a range of design thinking sessions and hackathons that I facilitate regularly, mostly in the legal industry, but not exclusively. And then on the other side, my sort of heart work is private clients who I coach and mentor, which is a whole range of people from sort of, a third-year lawyer wanting to change right up to quite senior, like partners who are thinking, how do I do this thing without burning out? So the themes there are really around having a sort of big, rich existence and not letting the job burn you out and define you. And I've just launched my corporate recovery program for the second time, which is a 3-month group program, really for people that are wanting to dive into, how do I make this work? Like, how do I work and live well in a world where things are just moving faster and faster all the time? So yeah, that's sort of, if I can summarize it, there's a whole lot of other things, but that's probably enough.
Yeah. And obviously Mentors was a really big firm, and now going out on your own. How do you find being in such a big firm with lots of people and support around you to now being by yourself?
Yes, such a good question. So I was worried, my key worry going out on my own was being lonely, because I'm such a people person. And weirdly, I don't think I've been lonely once. I don't know why. I just think I don't have an answer for that, but I probably, because I spend a lot of my day talking to people still, that I have enough social interaction. Like if I was sitting in my office just writing for days and not chatting to anyone, I'd be sad. The biggest challenge for me has been that I'm so used to having a lovely big IT infrastructure and a lot of people that know things that I don't know. So, I've always been able to, and I've been in law firms my whole working life mostly. When there was a problem with my computer or, something crashed or whatever, I'd be able to call someone. Or if I needed to launch a product or if I needed to kind of get access to some clients, whatever it is, that was all inbuilt. And now I have to do that all myself and it is excruciating. The back end is the worst. It's the worst. Yeah, it's a necessary evil.
Yeah. I'm also a people person. And then when I started working remote, that was also my biggest fear. I was like, I need to be in an office and talking to people. But I think it is something that always surprises you that you do actually just get on with that and you kind of fill it with like online meetings, or you might be meeting someone for coffee or facilitating something.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's like I've worked out how to fill my cup in a whole lot of ways, and I had always relied on just people, but actually now it's going for a walk and like there's a whole lot of things that top me up in the same way, and it's kind of having that little toolkit I think has been really helpful.
And so at the start of this episode, I said that I was excited to hear your perspective on the disruption that's happening in the legal industry. And disruption can sometimes be a buzzword. So what actually is this disruption we're talking about in the legal industry?
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting time for the legal industry, and for anyone working in this space of disruption. And I agree. Disruption's a good short word for something that's very big. And I suppose it's coming in a few angles. One is the obvious one that every conference everywhere is talking about, which is really emerging technology and in specifically Gen AI and its counterparts, what that's going to do for the work and the service delivery in the legal industry. The thing I find really interesting at the moment is that no one has the answers, and lawyers and their counterparts, people that support them, have made a life and career from knowing the answers to things. And suddenly we're asking very smart, risk-averse people to sit in the unknown and wait and see or experiment or, see what's coming and not have a clear answer. And I think that's really fascinating. And I think that's quite disruptive because it's different to other changes that have come along you could probably plan your way out of, but we can't yet. There's too many unknowns. I think the other area of disruption, which is linked, of course, but is a generational change. Like if you look at the new generation of lawyers coming in, quite rightly, I would say, a lot of them are saying, what I see ahead is not very appealing, or I don't really want to work in a way that means I've got to sacrifice everything else in my life. I want to work hard and do a good job and be a clever lawyer. But why does that mean I have to burn myself out? So I think this younger generation, and I'm so bad at knowing like what lingo generation they are, but I just, new cohort coming in, I'm very good at boundaries. And I think, not to be too controversial, but I feel like the legal industry thrived for a long time on people not having good boundaries, and so that I think is really interesting. And then the intersection of those two things is fascinating because the younger generation is quite tech savvy often and are kind of digital natives and are able to kind of lean into new technology well. So there's almost this reverse mentoring that has to occur with those that might be not as, excited about technology change, but also the new generation coming in have these big fundamental questions like, what is the work I'm going to do in 5 years? Like if it's not drafting an advice from scratch, because we know that Gen AI or some MLM can do that quite well now, what am I doing? What new skills do I need? Like, do I need to get really good at prompting, or do I need to become an SME in a particular area of technology, or get really good people skills, or whatever it is to weather the storm? So I think they're the two key bits for me that I find fascinating. And then, of course, there's this big cultural shifts that happen or need to happen with that. I was in a workshop recently and we're asking a group of senior partners, what was the last thing they'd seen that was this disruptive. And most of them said nothing has been this disruptive in their working lives. But interestingly, the thing that people can think of is either, funnily enough, when the fax machine came or email, because it's the last time, and it's quite interesting to think about, last time that ways of working shifted so fundamentally and everything sped up. So email, going from letter and fax to email would have been such a fundamental shift in the expectations of clients, in the way that you deal with counterparts. So I found that an interesting parallel, but obviously this has other flow-on ramifications as well. Long answer, but obviously something I'm quite excited about.
Yeah, both those topics I'm super excited to talk about. And first I might dive into more about the technology. And you said that there's a lot of unknowns, and so you might not have all of the answers, but how is technology already making us starting to work different? Or you mentioned Gen AI. Can you share your thoughts on that kind of space?
Yes, and I will put my hand up and say, like, with great pride, that I'm not a tech guru. Like, I come at this from someone that knows enough about everything, but not too much. But I suppose if I think about it from the ways of working lens, which I am very passionate about, what I find very interesting is obviously in Gen AI and the tool. So a lot of law firms now will have some embedded Gen AI internally and are building new tools. And the most obvious one is where they've taken like a chat GPT and they've got an internal model so it's safe. So already people are getting faster at synthesizing information. You can, I've been doing a lot of work in it for something where you put a whole lot of crappy information in and it'll give you a nice summary. So it's kind of speeding up synthesis, things like Copilot. This is the real simple stuff, but I don't know, as an ex-consultant doing thousands of stakeholder interviews, the transcription on it is beautiful. Like, it's sort of, if nothing else, and it is doing much more than this, but it's taking out like a bottom percentage of frustrating work. Then the next layer is that it's, there's tools that are getting very good at drafting advices or summarizing cases. And there's a lot of these in the market that we know of. So that's where you hear this language around the bottom 40% of work in a law firm disappearing. What I find interesting about it, though, is from my experience and the discussions that I'm part of, it speeds up processes and produces more information, but then that information's got to go somewhere. Like, what do I mean by that? So, let's say before you might have sent 3 dot points over about, this is what, is the key points of this issue. ChatGPT or its kind can give you this lovely, 10-point summary, but what does it mean? Like, it's just then someone else has to understand that and pass it back. So one of my concerns with it is sort of creating more and more information that still has to be digested by someone. So without some really clear thinking around how it's used or why are we producing all this information, I think there's a risk that it's going to make everyone busier because we're just all drowning in more and more lovely summaries that a tool's done. You imagine someone sends you a big summary, you're like, I better put it through ChatGPT to summarize it for myself. We're just synthesizing things into nothing.
Yeah.
So there's a need to think really smartly about how it's used as well, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of that next level of unknown. It's like we know it can help us with that 45% now, but what's that next step going to look like once this technology evolves more? And it's kind of one of those unknowns. I just want to ask you, what timeline are we thinking here? So we can start maybe changing what we learn at university or changing crowdship programs or changing everything.
Well, I think we do know that should be changing now. We don't know when, but already, a second-year lawyer has fundamentally had to get their head around technology that didn't really exist 2 years ago. No one cared about it as much as they do now. So I think, and you see universities grappling with this already about how do you actually manage assessments and things when it's so easy to produce information out of an MLM. And then the question is, well, how do you get people to produce it well? Like, what are you then assessing that's going to be valuable for them later on? So, I mean, these questions are so big. Like, it's so interesting. But yeah, I think timeline-wise, like, now. It all needs to change now. Well, we don't know why or for what. And I think that point around, the bottom 40%, it's like, but to what value? Like, I think the question we haven't answered yet is, what is the value of this efficiency? And we've seen this with many technologies and changes over the years that everyone gets so excited and like, it's more efficient. It's like quicker. And it's like, but why is that good? Like, tell me why doing this thing quicker or producing more information in this case is a good one. So I think people need to think really critically. Like the example of the transcription, easy, obvious win. Like it's so good and quick and it's doing something that we don't need a human to do. That's a good example. But for other things, it's like, well, is it really yet really adding value, both to the business of the firm and to the clients?
Yeah. And speaking of clients, what do you think clients' perspective is of, they might hear or like they'll be aware of what ChatGPT does in the first instance. And so they might expect lawyers to be starting to use new technology, and we will get to a point where a lot of the work that lawyers do and would usually charge their time out for might be able to be done in like a fifth of the time, but we still be charging clients that. Do you think they'll expect changes in that whole area?
Yeah, this is, I mean, as you can imagine, a lot of discussion on this in law firm land because it goes absolutely to the business model. I mean, I think fundamentally the business model will have to change in some, if not most respects, away from a time-based model, because time loses its power when things can be done really quickly. And it's to the detriment of the law firm as well, that if they've, for example, built some really clever bit of technology internally and they're using that to produce very high quality advice or whatever it might be for a client, like, but it takes 2 minutes. Is it right that the client's paying for 2 minutes of time? No, like they're getting the benefit of this big system. So it sort of goes both ways. But yeah, I can imagine there will be increased pressure from in-house around looking at invoices or looking at the way things are produced and expecting different things. I think the challenge a lot of in-house teams have is that they're trying to grapple not only with what does it mean for the delivery of their work, but what does it mean for their organization? They're sort of trying to help navigate the risks. A lot of organizations still don't allow access to it. So they might be hearing a lot about its benefits or the speed with which it can produce things, but have no ability to actually access and produce in their own environment yet. So there's sort of challenges for a lot of in-house teams in questions for themselves about, we know this would probably help us. We want to get on board with it, but we're sort of hamstrung, or we don't really have the time and capacity and the permission to play and work it out for ourselves. But yes, to your first question, there will fundamentally, there must surely be pressure coming in terms of the way things are charged out. It seems like a no-brainer in some ways, right? I guess it just depends where the pressure come from and for what work types first.
Yeah. And you were saying that as business structures are a talk of law firm land, are you hearing particular suggestions of different structures that they might follow, or is it still a big unknown?
It's still a big unknown, I think, and obviously I'm not in the 10 of all the law firms, so who knows? But there's examples already of fundamentally different models. So Law Squared, for example, is completely not time-based. They do value-based fixed fee pricing. They're Australia and UK. Moores is a firm in Victoria that does only value-based pricing, so no time-based work at all. And there's other, subscription-based models popping up. So I suppose if you ask, like, what are the key options? And again, not a pricing guru, but interested in it. There's like the value-based model, subscription-based for certain services, fixed fee, like anything that's getting away from time. And then the big question is what happens in terms of if law firms start to become legal tech product houses. They're developing products for their clients. The business model around that's like totally different again. So yeah, I don't know that there's a clear answer, but you can see these firms that are doing things really well in a non-time based way already.
It's super interesting. I think a subscription model would be super interesting because like the consumers of the legal services would also like it because they have more reassurance, and the law firm would have reassurance of how much they're going to be having coming in every month or year or
And you can see, like, I don't know, most people, I mean, I think about the things I purchase, like not legal services, but like my accounting's subscription based, my Pilates subscription, like most people have probably already got a little bank of subscription based things. But I think like if accountants can do it, but I don't know, it's
very similar. Yeah.
But like businesses are working this out, right? There are ways. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about law firm culture at the moment, and we're thinking about all this change happening with technology, do you think that the current culture is conducive to change and innovation?
Yes and no, to give you a very unsatisfactory answer. There are pockets, surely in all firms, like as I said, I don't have insight into all firms, but there are incredible pockets of energy and innovation and change. And I think because firms are being pretty cautious about what they tell the market, because no one wants to kind of panic the horses, I think we'd be amazed actually if we really knew everything that was going on in terms of the cultural change. Having said that, there is still absolutely very big pockets of the legal industry that find change really challenging. And it's not really surprising. Like I run a presentation sometimes on this around what are the historical and structural reasons that change is hard. And we come from fundamentally a precedent-based system. So we're trained to look back, not forward. Like this is the model. We're risk averse, time poor. Like there's all these factors that make the culture what it is. And firms that are doing this well are not just thinking about technology, but are thinking about the cultural and mindset interventions that are going to be required. So I would say what firms should be doing, which seems a little bit more like a playing a long game, but like train everyone in design thinking, train everyone in these skills, which are not just skills, but a different way of thinking, fundamentally opposed to the legal way of thinking. And of course, we can't lose the amazing things that make good lawyers good. But we do need a cohort of lawyers that are able to put that down sometimes and think experimentally or think, in a fail fast way. So that's sort of the mindset piece. But of course, mindset and culture are so interlinked. And I think that's something we should see more of. Culturally, the busy work phenomena is still everywhere. And what I mean by that is there's still a culture of like high-fiving your mates for how busy you are kind of thing. You walk in the hallways and you hear, you busy? Yeah, so busy surviving. Like that's the currency still for a lot of firms. And I think that's quite dangerous for a number of reasons. Like from a well-being perspective, that is very problematic because it really doesn't allow people permission to rest or breathe or, have space. But also that busy culture, if that continues and then you add a faster technology on top of it, it only spins the wheels faster. So unless firms get really good or like legal culture in general gets better at making space, so not always working like this, I'm concerned to see where it ends in some ways because there's always going to be technology that makes it faster and faster. And then what happens? Yeah. So there's a fair bit of work to do in the culture space, which is exciting for people like me, and I think it sounds like you, that are really interested in that space, but probably not for the faint-hearted as well.
Yeah, it's definitely, I've had a bunch of my friends who have all started at law firms, and it's that conversation of like, oh, how busy are you? Oh, I've got so much work. And then I think it's also comes down to you have to do a timesheet every day and account for every single minute. And I felt that is such a driving factor for people being like, I'm so busy, I need to be busy because if I don't fill it in, what do they do? Like they come home and they're talking about, what do you put on your timesheet when you go for your coffee and when you go to the
Yeah.
bathroom? Like I don't know what to put.
I know the danger of having capacity, which is such a funny thing. The interesting thing with that is if you look at in-house teams who don't have utilization structures, the majority of them aren't as busy in the same way. So there's something that gets inherited from law firm land that people take over. So even if you take away the structures of utilization, initially it doesn't shift the culture on its own. So I find that really interesting as well. So it's the utilization thing is a huge part of it, but there's other factors in terms of people have learnt that's the currency, you know?
Yeah. I wonder how we make that shift from it being busy to productive and not the currency of being busy.
This is basically my whole job now to think about like what I'm passionate about. My big like soapbox is around busy work and busy culture because I just think it must be shifted. And I don't know how it can be yet, except through many conversations and people advocating it and discussions like this where it's like raising a flag that things need to change.
Yeah, it needs to come from the top as well, because as much as you can have people like the younger generation coming in who are demanding a change, when you're trying to impress your boss or progress your career, you kind of
Absolutely.
have to adhere to this busy culture and play into it rather than
Yeah.
trying to go against it and saying, well, I can actually do this in 2 hours rather than 4 hours if you let me
Yeah.
do this.
And I
But it's
might
kind of
just go and
discouraged.
like walk my dog in those extra 2 hours. Like imagine really in my fantasy future state, the opposite of the wheels spinning faster and faster. If we tackle busy culture and then we're like, great, like this technology is so good, everything's done quickly. So we only have to work 4 hours a day to get everything done. Like I know that's never going to happen, but you know, the other side of this, like there are theorists out there that are talking about the sort of reduction in our hours and what that would mean for the workforce. That
And
you
I think
could just actually go and have a nice life and do your work really well quickly.
And I think flexibility plays into the idea of busy culture a lot, as well as just everything that the younger generation is wanting. Like at VXC, for example, it's you just have to do your hours. You can do them whenever you want or need. So I can go for a walk in the afternoon.
Yeah, so good.
And then it just makes you a lot more productive when you need to do your work because you're in the right headspace, you're ready to go. And yeah. And so, kind of keeping on that topic, we mentioned before the disruption that's happening and we spoke about technology, and then the other one was the new generation coming in. How do you think they're approaching work differently in terms of where they want to end up with their career and how they want to be working?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't want to speak on behalf of this generation, right? Like I'm old now for them, which is depressing in itself. But what cooler wise, like what I hear and understand, which I completely agree with, is that when you look up at partners and the life and work of a partner who's been at the firm for 25 years, that's not looking as appealing because it is such a big all-consuming job. And I would say, for myself included, as a woman with a young child, unfortunately, there's still a thing where I looked around and I thought, I'm not sure that this really works unless I have someone at home. Like, and that is an unfortunate thing. But we're in a world where people are having kids and are wanting to really have 50-50 parenting. People want to be well, look after themselves, see their families, like do kind of normal things that we should all be able to expect in our lives. But traditionally, the model for like most partners is that you have to sacrifice so much in terms of being home, your health, etc., to get there, that is looking incredibly unappealing. But the interesting question is, well, what does that mean for, a young, ambitious person that feels still, I want to go far in this career. But what does that mean when I look up and see as the kind of pinnacle is very unappealing? So I think, yeah, like that's going to be part of the big shift because there's going to have to be different models, other ways that it's attractive to be a senior leader or climb up a ladder that doesn't look how it does now. And I think the other thing that's really interesting, and I have a few coaching clients in this category that are thinking, I don't want to climb the ladder at all. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to have a really interesting job or a series of roles that interest me, and I meet good people and I get paid well, but like I don't need to be the CEO of a big bank or something at the end of it all. But how do I do that? Like, actually, how do I get from this linear junior lawyer bit out into these adjacent roles that might use my legal skills, or where I'm sort of in legal tech or whatever it is? So I think that there's that sense of the jobs around being a lawyer, like with a law degree, are growing and growing. And one of the challenges is that they've all got different names and it's very hard to actually work out what they are. But people are really energized by this notion that they could use their skills in a non-traditional way. And I think that's super exciting, but it's still the path's a bit murky still. There's not a clear alternative legal career path yet.
Yeah, and I think it's because if you're going into law, you've probably gone from university, you've done a clerkship, become a graduate. You don't have to go through that looking for jobs because you know that these are the firms that have the grad programs you're going to apply for. Whereas if you did a business degree, for example, the net is generally, you might have like the main consulting kind of firms, but then the net is a lot wider with all of the other options and you're more aware of them. But when you might go to leave a law firm after having practiced, you don't really have those grad programs to look for or any idea of what you could go into. So
it was like that for me as well, that I came out of a big university where really the pathway that was kind of provided or given support for was the commercial law path or community legal centres. Like it was very unclear what the million other options were. And I remember it as a fourth year lawyer where I got to the point where I was like, I fundamentally don't want to do this. But what the hell do I do? Do I want to do? I just like, it was so hard to find the next step. So hard. And I don't think it should be that hard, really.
And you also probably don't have the confidence of, you can do law and you know how to do that, but you might see on the job description being like, you need to have experience in this and this.
Yeah.
And if you're a lawyer, you just likelihood is that you won't have the opportunity to do anything outside of legal work. Yeah. And do you think that law firm leadership are aware of this change from like the perspectives of people coming through and not wanting to say be a partner or a part of that structure, but still wanting to have something similar to that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I think it's the generational shift is a huge topic because, law firms to survive need to retain great talent, to put it in really kind of, businessy terms. And if that talent can't see a future, then they're going to leave. And so, and that's expensive. Mercenary approach, like also good firms want to keep people that bring good culture. And I think the interesting shift at the moment, going back to the sort of tech disruption, is that a lot of firms, and if you look at the activities in the big firms, there's a sort of investment in alternative roles like AI leads and all these other adjacent roles. And I know the firms I've worked with that they do identify pretty early on those special people in those junior ranks that are like super excited and maybe have gone off and done some prompting and have got 1,000 ideas. And for those people, there's always opportunities kind of to move laterally in law firms, and because they want to keep that, like the brain power of those people. But yeah, there's absolutely discussion about it and trying to work out what the right balance is to sustain a healthy business, which fundamentally requires people to work hard in a certain way. And if you're signing up for a big law firm, like still you're signing up for a certain level of hard work. But then what do you do about career paths, and what do you do to support people to be well and protect their own boundaries? Like it's a tricky conundrum.
Yeah.
The leaders.
Even if you figure it out in these big law firms like Mentors, there is opportunities to go into other roles outside of law but within the firm still. But then when you think of smaller firms or even big firms in New Zealand that just aren't as big as the scale is in Australia or other countries, sometimes there's just not those other internal roles that these people can go to, making it even more harder. Yeah.
And most, like above the top, what is it? Like top 8, I don't know, top 10 firms size-wise in Australia. Yeah, most of them are lucky to have, someone trying to navigate AI and legal ops or whatever it is separate to their IT person. Or like they don't have these big structures, or they might have someone in L&D who's also doing cultural change. Like you're right, it's the big firms obviously have big challenges in terms of the scale of it all, but they also have more resources, and mid and below the adjacencies aren't there quite as much. Yeah.
Well, I've got some quick fire questions now
Yes.
about the future of law. I've got
yes.
4 of them.
I'll stare into my
and-
crystal ball.
yeah, so you will need to stare into the crystal ball because it probably is an unknown answer, so you can just give your perspective. So you
No
just
one
say the
hold
first
me to
sentence
this.
or yeah, we'll come back at you in 5 or 10
Yeah,
years.
I will be wrong, I'm sure. Yeah.
So first of all, what will legal services look like in 10 years?
Ooh, 10 years.
Yeah.
I hope different. I think there will surely be some fundamentally different pricing structures at play, and possibly a very different concept of who are the leaders. So now there's like the big 8 or the big 6 or whatever. I think there's real opportunities for small, smart firms to really take some market share, and technology will necessarily be embedded, or this new Gen AI. I mean, who knows what's the technology going to be in 10 years? Like how quickly everything's moving. So technology as a critical part of service delivery, fundamentally different pricing models at play, smaller firms doing really smart things and disrupting the big end of town.
Yeah. I love the small firm thing.
Yeah, it's like a leapfrog.
Yeah, because there's less boundaries and less kind of things you've got to people you've got to get through and people you've got to convince. Yeah, so I really like that. And the next question you actually asked yourself, but what emerging trends do you think will have the most significant impact on the legal profession?
Can I give an optimistic answer?
Of course.
Which is a fundamental rethinking about ways of working and a shift to like protecting people's boundaries better and having really thriving cultures. I think hopefully, I'm hoping technology is current technology changes are like a bit of a kick to do the hard work to say, well, there's no reason anymore that being a lawyer means you've got to give your soul to your firm or never sleep again or always be stressed. So I'd like to think that the narrative, this busy work narrative, has dissipated and you can choose to be a lawyer without being like, see you in 5 to 10 years, family. Like, yeah. That would be my hope.
Nice. I love it. And for students or law students studying or the people who are teaching the next generation of lawyers, what are the most important skills that we should be teaching that we might not be teaching now?
Yeah. So I think when you think about what makes a lawyer good, other than time on the ground, it's critical thinking. It's being able to think hard about issues. And I think that is something that law schools do well and needs to be maintained. And I think probably the answers there are not in not doing that work, but changing the way you assess it. So not having essays because everyone can do them at ChatGPT, having a lot more, verbal assessments. And then I think that real training and discernment around information. So if you've been in the law for 10 to 15 years and you see something that gets generated from ChatGPT, you know if it's chaff or not. But a junior can't know that without training. So I think the critical, we have to embrace this technology is here to stay. How do you get someone at law school really clever about understanding what is correct and how to validate and fact check what comes out and how to source properly and reference properly and do all those things to ensure that they are able to produce trustworthy information, even if it's augmented by technology?
Yeah, I think it would be so interesting if a university had a paper you could, or a course you could do on AI and law, because it would be a safe space to try everything. And there'd probably be some really cool ideas and projects
Yeah,
that came out of there that law firms could even look to.
totally. And some law, I know Melbourne University and I think a couple in Victoria, I know that because that's where I am, do courses now where you build apps and do
Cool.
things with emerging technology, and they bring law firms in to assess. So
For
there's some
like a law
cool
degree.
in a law degree. Yeah,
Oh,
it's a
wow.
subject in a law degree. One's called Law Apps, I think, at Melbourne Uni, but there's a few around, and they do like hackathon and they do like build things. Very cool. So I think that's really exciting as well for people that are liking the business around law,
Yeah.
but not the law. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned before kind of going away from essays and maybe doing speaking assessments. I remember on exchange when I was doing my law degree, some of the assessments is you walk in and then you pick up a piece of paper and that's a topic you have to talk 10 minutes about. And so I think it really like teaches you to actually know the topic rather than knowing how to write an essay, and sometimes just waffling because you don't actually know what you're talking about sometimes.
If you think about like interacting with clients in real life, often it might be a phone call where they're like, I don't know what this issue is. And you've got to understand, is it a legal issue? Is it something you can help with? And broadly, what are the things you need to ask them? And that's a really, in any world, not just legal, a fundamentally useful skill. So yeah, I think those sort of really practical communication styles as well would be great to train people in.
Yeah. And the last one is, what advice would you give to young lawyers starting or entering into the profession today?
Okay. I take a deep breath because I get very passionate about this. My advice is never, ever feel stuck. Never feel stuck that where you are is where you have to stay. If it doesn't feel right or you're not thriving, there are other ways to do this thing. And I say that as someone who got stuck themselves and felt that there was no alternative pathways for me. And I have found like the most wildly alternative pathway still staying in the law ever. And now that I coach young lawyers who feel stuck as well, I just want to say that you can't like take some risks when you're young with your career, experiment, see what you like. Like in 30 years, it's none of it's going to be a problem. Like I think we think that we're like, you've got to set and forget in our 20s or whatever. It's like absolutely not. Like that's the time to play. Go play, experiment, travel, do a few jobs, see what you like. Like the thing that you're passionate about that you discover, that's what will matter in 30 years. Not did you like ride out the first 7 years of your life at one firm. Like it's just not going to matter.
Yeah, I love it. So thank you so much, Mollie. If people would like to get in contact with you or would like your help on something, how are they best to contact you?
Yes, so they can, my website is just my name, so mollietregillis.com, and all my contact details and programs I have going are there. Mollie Tregillis on LinkedIn, I'm pretty chatty there, and Mollie_Treg on Instagram. So you can catch me, and I love a chat, so jump into my DMs and say hi.
Nice. And for all the lawyers in Australia who are going to Outma in Brisbane, Mollie's also speaking and we'll be there also. So I'd love to see you.
So excited. Yay.
Awesome. Thanks, Mollie.
Thank you.